Welcome to SEC Sports Roundtable. This is your host, Shane Bailey, back for our, I'm losing track, we're doing so many of these. This is our fourth preview, is that right, guys?
Yep.
Britton's been on all of them, so yes, he's
Number 4.
nodding his head. Number 4. We've been real West heavy, doing another West team tonight, Mississippi State Bulldogs. We have Blair with us. He has promised that he's going to keep his internet up the entire time for us so that we can have his expertise. Blair Smyly, welcome.
It's good to be back. Go to hell, Ole Miss.
Starting things
Great
off
way
right.
to start the Bulldogs preview.
Yep. So we are doing a Mississippi State Bulldogs preview, if you just didn't guess that. If you're watching on Google Hangouts, the middle from left to right is Britton Burton. Welcome back, Britton.
Hey, good to be back. I've been seeing a lot of you lately.
Yeah, I know. Some more of you than my wife.
Yeah.
What, another podcast? It's like,
Yeah, that's exactly what she said.
You got the same thing, huh?
Uh-huh.
And then also another Alabama fan, Nick Jones from Bama Hammer. Welcome back, Nick.
It's good to be back.
You don't know anything about that yet. You just wait.
I know.
We are SEC Sports Roundtable, a podcast, video cast, whatever cast or means you want to call this, of talking SEC. We do it from a fan's perspective. As you could tell, Blair's a Mississippi State guy. I'm a Kentucky guy. I got a couple Alabama men in the house tonight. So we do it from a fan's perspective. But we look at the SEC, and we break down all our previews, all the teams, and we're doing all 14 teams before we get you kicked off over the last 4 weeks of the preseason. So we're going to get things started tonight with Mississippi State. Our pre-show, Blair is already fired up, so it should be entertaining, to say the least. He's got some really nice things to say about teams like A&M. So we're gonna get right into things, and Blair, we're just going to let you kick us off, and are we looking at SEC West contenders? And then I'll leave the mic to you.
Yeah, I believe so, but until they actually do anything, that's the whole thing with Mississippi State. I mean, everybody thought they might do it in 2001, they thought they might do it in 2008, and thought they might do it in 2011, and those were all kind of didn't really live up to the promise. But when I look at 2014 for Mississippi State, most people automatically default to Dak Prescott and really kind of the offensive side of the ball. But I like to start on the defensive side. That's what's got me as excited as probably as anything as a Mississippi State fan. You're talking about, a team, a defense that was, if I'm not mistaken, was 4th overall defense and number 5 overall in the SEC. And scoring defense last year. So pretty good defense that was really, really young. Bring back 19 of the 22 too deep back into this year. So you got pretty much 8 or 9 guys up front. You got 5 out of your best 6 linebackers back. You got 10 out of your best 11 secondary backs. So you're talking about a defense I think it really kind of came into its own the last 3 games. If you remember last year, State was 4-6 heading into the Arkansas game with about a 60% healthy quarterback, 1 injured, and then a true freshman backing him up. So, they went into those last 2 games hurting at the quarterback position, and the defense in the last 3 games, including the bowl game, gave up 13 offensive points. So including just 3 offensive points against Ole Miss. So that's one thing I'm really excited about. I think there is where State's really, really, really going to be salty on defense. What gets everybody excited is obviously Dak Prescott. And that's what everything is kind of getting the Heisman, dark horse stuff that was all started by what's his name, Palmer, after the Egg Bowl when he came in the 4th quarter. But, I mean, if you look at Dak Prescott, he's a guy that Mississippi State's never had as a quarterback. He's a guy that fits Dan Mullen's system. He is, everybody takes a look at his stats from last year. He had, over 1,900 yards throwing, 829 yards rushing. And, he played 8.5 quarters. I mean, 8.5 games in total. So he had 25 touchdowns that he accounted for, 10 throwing, 13 rushing, 2 of them he actually caught. He did that in 34 quarters. So that's what's got everybody excited. If he can play 12 games, Mississippi State's schedule, pretty much 4 cupcake non-conference. You got Vanderbilt, Kentucky, Arkansas that you should be better than. So I think the floor for Mississippi State is a 7-5 team. And I think if anything, as a State fan, we're looking at 8-4 and better than that. So that kind of that 8-4 to 10-2 range is what I'm looking for, and I think we've got the ability to do that. If we can find a kicker, I'd be really happy. But other than that, I think you look at Mississippi State. You always look at, right now you're looking at Auburn, Texas A&M, and Ole Miss. You got Auburn, Texas A&M at home. You got Ole Miss on the road. Those are really your 3 swing games to me. You got LSU and Alabama on the road. We've lost to freaking LSU for 25 freaking years, so I'm never going to pick us beating them until it actually happens. But if you don't think that after the 3rd game of the year, when we're 3-0, heading into Baton Rouge at the end of September, when they've already played Wisconsin in a couple of cupcakes, we're getting them early. And if you can get LSU early, that could set that game could be set up for a special year. So we'll kind of have to see how it plays out. But when you're talking about 8 starters back on offense, 19 out of your 22 deep on the defensive side of the ball, on a team that actually was 4th in the conference in total defense, there's a lot of stuff to be excited about. That's a quick synopsis.
He took all the good stuff.
I tell you what,
just sitting here marking through my bullet points.
These podcasts have been going an hour. Blair just took it to 8 minutes.
All right, well, see you tomorrow night, folks.
All right, guys, good podcast.
And to top it all off, guys, you're going into a brand new stadium. So I mean, they bowled in that one end. They spent $85 million, and it's going to be a pretty cool deal. And you're playing Southern Miss that you hadn't played in 23 years. When that game got put on the schedule, guys, 4 years ago, we were like, what in the world are these guys thinking? We got nothing to lose. We got everything to lose against Southern Miss. We don't want to play those clowns. And then luckily they just become the basement of college football. So that helps out instead of the 11-1 team that beat Kevin Sumlin's Houston team a couple of years ago. So, but being able to start that game playing Davis Wade Stadium, which is the 100th year of football in that stadium. I mean, football at Mississippi State, I think it's going to be pretty fun. I'm looking forward to it.
Did he even breathe through that 8 minutes? That was the question.
Hey,
like
man.
one big, huge, giant breath, and then he just talked.
I got more if you want some more.
We know you do. We'll get to it. Now, you talk about it. I think you said 19 of 22, 2 deep on the defense. I mean, from the offensive side, you're returning a large portion of your guys as well, too. I mean, you're set up. You only lost like 4 starters or something like that.
Yeah. Well, the only thing you really lost on offense, you actually got better at the running back position. Ladarius Perkins was, he was a great guy and a great player for Mississippi State. But if you actually watch Mississippi State towards the end last year, Josh Robinson should have been carrying the ball more. He fits that offense of what Mullen does. What we saw last year was really what everybody's been waiting for is they've been waiting for Dak. And what they saw last year was a guy that basically spent 6 or 7 games learning how to play in the SEC. I mean, his first true start as a guy was on the road at Auburn, and if you saw that game, he rushed for 134 yards and just killed them. But the problem is we don't need Dak to rush for 134 yards. We need him to rush for 70, and we need Josh Robinson running for 100, or a combination of those backs. And so I think that's where you'll see backs. I think you got a strength. Last year we went into the season with pretty much inexperience across the board at wide receiver, losing Chad Bumpus and all of the seniors that we lost the year before. Now that's a you got Derunya Wilson, who's 6'5". You got Robert Johnson back for a senior year. You got some weapons on the offense. You got an unbelievable tight end set of 3 guys, including a 6'8" or 6'7", 260-pound basketball player coming in from JUCO that's just an animal that I'm looking forward to actually seeing. The question at Mississippi State is you got to replace Gabe Jackson, who was 51 starts at right guard or left guard for State, and then you got to replace a right tackle. And there's a lot of guys there from a depth standpoint that State's not had in the past that I think we're going to be okay. But that's really the only weakness that you have on the offensive side of the ball is is kind of the offensive line. We just got to kind of figure that out.
But in the big scheme of things, I mean, that could be an Achilles heel if it doesn't
Correct.
Because you need that offensive line to protect Dak Prescott, because you saw last year how your quarterbacks can get banged up. That's the only reason we saw Dak Prescott as much as we did.
Yeah.
And then you've got a running game that you're going to rely on from the running back, and if you're not getting those holes from the offensive line, that completely changes your whole outlook.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that people missed last year, if you didn't really follow, like if you looked at last year, one of the things that everybody talked about Florida, had a ton of losses from the standpoint of starters missing games. When State actually kicked off against Oklahoma State last year, they lost over 120 starts from the 22 on the offensive defensive fronts that started that game. They lost over 120 games of starters last year. They had huge injury issues, and they still were able to get to 6-6 and go to a bowl game and cap it off with a winning season. So that's what we've actually got. You got Justin Malone, who can fill in from a guard standpoint, that was starting at guard last year. We had a true freshman that basically came in and played the last 9 games. So we feel pretty comfortable that, hey, they've got 3 tackles, they've got 3 guards, and they got 2 centers. And at Mississippi State, you've never really had that. A couple of guys are unproven, so you got to make sure that right edge is good. I think from the guard tandem side, I think we're going to be fine from that interior. But I think what also helps State is you have Dak back there, which is totally different from a Tyler Russell. Tyler Russell never really fit the offense, unfortunately. Everybody loved Tyler Russell because he's a Mississippi-grown kid, but he didn't fit what Dan Mullen did. And there's not going to be a lot of times that Dak Prescott's just going to sit back there for 5 minutes. He's going to get around, and we're going to be able to run the option. We're going to be able to run some of the things that really Dan Mullen's offense is really fit for. So looking forward to it.
Britton, I know you're high on Mississippi State. What other bullet points are you high about that Blair didn't touch on for you?
Well, he's pretty much, like I said, he took all my stuff, but he's the Mississippi State guy, so that's fine. But there's kind of 3 key things that I look at and that I'm reading that I'm so high, and he's already touched on 19 of the 22 too deep on defense coming back. And then a subset of that, I think your top 8 defensive linemen and that front 4 coming back.
Yeah.
One of whom is Chris Jones, who I think could wind up he will be a top 10 to 15 draft pick by the time he's done, and I think could be one of the best linemen in the country this year, even though he's just a sophomore. So I think that defense is just going to be. We saw flashes of it last year. I mean, they were a top 5 in the conference, top 30 nationally defense at times, playing a lot of young guys. I think we're going to see a dominant Mississippi State defense this year. Oh, by the way, in a league year where only like 4 quarterbacks are returning, and we no one really knows what we're going to get offensively from a lot of SEC teams this year, I think they're going to be absolutely dominant. And then the Dak Prescott factor, I'm absolutely a believer in him. I think he winds up being the first team All-SEC quarterback by the end of the year if he stays healthy. And then he touched on it also, the schedule, the way that things worked out with them pulling Kentucky and Vanderbilt from the East. When you compare that to what Auburn has, if Alabama has a pretty favorable pull from the East as well, but but still, just the pull that they have, and the fact that they get Auburn at home. Really, their two toughest games are LSU and Alabama on the road, which those are obviously tough, but you're not going to get through the SEC without some tough games. So I just think those three factors working together, and the fact that the other West contenders, I think LSU is going to step back. I think really it's Auburn, Alabama, Ole Miss, and Mississippi State are probably going to be the top four teams. Maybe LSU finishes ahead of one of the Mississippi schools, but I think things can break right where Mississippi State could win the West, but I think more than likely is competing for that second spot with a 9-3, 10-2 type of record. There's just a lot to like about them right now.
Nick, what do you think?
I'm sitting here just looking at my schedule, and I know we'll get to that later. And I was kind of when we were doing the Auburn game. Obviously, Auburn has not nearly as favorable of a schedule as Mississippi State does. But I was trying to kind of throw some losses in there because it was kind of tough. I was coming out with these 10-2, maybe 11-win seasons, and I'm looking at this again, and I'm having these same problems. But two guys they hit on a lot of the things, and Blair, I've always said this, that if it was okay, which is it's not culturally acceptable to pull for two SEC schools at once, especially in the West, but if there was ever a team that I was going to pull for, it would be Mississippi State. So there's just like glimmer of hope in my in my heart every single year up until the Alabama game. But you look at the schedule up and down. I mean, it's just a great pull for a year. I mean, there's just so many things that are going right, whether it be Dak Prescott being really one of the more experienced quarterbacks, and maybe even the best quarterback that we've got coming back in the SEC. But I think the defensive improvements that Dan Mullins going to have, and I think you hit on it as well, Dak Prescott being a guy that fits in Dan Mullins' system. This could be the first time that since he left Florida, that he has a system type quarterback that can do everything he wants him to do, whether it be, when you said caught a couple of touchdowns last season, that reminded me of a Tim Tebow kind of guy. But and not to mention, he's got some weapons, like you said. You've got this JUCO tight end coming in. I mean, you just look at his intangibles, and you impressive already. And a guy that I saw, growing up in Birmingham, Darrell Wilson. I mean, he's a beast on the basketball court, and you've got him. He probably runs under a 4.5 on the outside. He's 6'5". I mean, he had some experience last year as a freshman. I think he caught about 25 passes, had probably close to 400 yards. I don't know. I mean, this is. I think you said 2008, 2001, 2 years that we kind of labeled as well. This could be Mississippi State's year. I'm not sure the dominoes have ever fallen or potentially fallen quite like they have for Mississippi State ever. I mean, you look at so many question marks with Texas A&M the past couple of years being a top contender in the West, and LSU being down without a quarterback and with a bunch of guys that we don't know that are unproven. I mean, Alabama and Auburn are really up there, and I mean, heck, Mississippi State almost beat Auburn last year, and with an improved defense, they should have for sure. And with an improved defense and some questions on Auburn's defense, I mean,
yeah. And I think one of the things that I take into it is the whole Dak Prescott thing. The thing about Dak Prescott is he's one of those guys that when I say Mississippi State's never had a quarterback like Dak Prescott, Mississippi State in 100 freaking years of football have not had anything to compare to Dak Prescott. I mean, you talk about a quarterback-starved university when it comes to football. I mean,
Blair, why has Mullen not been able to get that kind of quarterback in there?
Well, if you actually look at what he did, this is what he basically came in and he pretty much had to take Tyler Russell. And Tyler Russell would have probably been better off if he would have been if Tyler Russell would have been in Croon's offense, the West Coast offense, he'd have been unbelievable. If he'd have been in Spurrier's offense, South Carolina kind of came in at the very end of his recruiting, and Spurrier tried to get him to go to South Carolina. Perfect guy for Spurrier. He is a true drop-back passer. He never really fit, and Mullen could never tweak the offense to it. And what happened is, in those first couple of years, if you remember, if you knew anything about State's recruiting, is that Mullen was getting a dual-threat guy, and he was getting kind of a drop back guy. He didn't really know what he could get. And Dak Prescott actually was really his first quarterback that he signed after Tyler Russell in 2010, where Dak Prescott was like a 3-star, kind of blew up into a high 3-star. LSU actually came in. Les Miles and all them came after him the last 2 weeks, the last 2 months of recruiting, and he stayed with State just because we were the first offer. And it really came back to, I think Mullen saw when he had him in camp, was here's a guy that's got all of these traits that I like. And if you see now, if y'all saw the freshman last year that played in the Egg Bowl, this was a kid that was a true freshman that was really kind of a last-ditch recruit that we took on. You got Elijah Staley, who was actually committed to Vanderbilt with James Franklin, decommitted there. He's a big basketball player out of Georgia. He's about 6'6", left-handed, dual threat guy. Then we took on another dual threat. We got 2 dual threats. So next year with this 2015 class, we'll probably have 6 scholarship quarterbacks. I think that's changing with what we've actually got, because Mullen basically says, I'm not really dealing with all this kind of drop back passing guys. I'm going after dual threat guys, and this is what we're going to do. But with what Prescott went through last year with the death of his mother, if you remember games last year, he had 10 touchdowns and 7 interceptions, which everybody kind of points that it's not a great deal. He threw 3 interceptions against South Carolina, had the worst game, which was really an outlier last year if you watched anything that Prescott did, and 12 hours later his mother passed away. So he basically went into the game knowing that his mom was basically fixing to die. He had a bad game, and so I think if you take a look at him, he doesn't turn the ball over. I think he's going to be a way more efficient passer than people give him credit for. Plus, I just think he's a guy that just wills himself. People gravitate towards him. He's an unbelievable leader. Obviously, he's a high character guy with what he went through last year. But I think he's a lot like I always talked about Gus Malzahn. I think Gus Malzahn is one of those guys that just goes and reaches that bar. I think Dak Prescott's the guy that just goes and reaches that bar. And when I take a look at the SEC quarterbacks, I would put Dak probably second or third. You got Bo Wallace, who's got a lot of experience. But if I want to look at, hey, what's the upside? I'm going to take Dak Prescott. If he's got a huge ceiling that he can make a gigantic leap. For him to do, if he plays 12 games, we should be looking at over 2,500 yards passing, over 1,000 yards rushing. That's just it. Complete domination. But we'll see how it all works out. But I'm excited as hell.
Wilson thinks you're playing 15 games, right?
That's right, man. Boy knows what he's talking about. And if y'all saw the SI, Sports Illustrated had an article today with the 5 sleepers to make it into the first college playoff, and Mississippi State was the second one on the team on the list. It's kind of dark horse teams that are really kind of outside the top 25. Had Florida in there, Marshall, Iowa, and somebody else, but. I think if everything falls right, not only is the schedule good, guys. What I like about it is how the schedule sets up throughout the calendar of the year. And that's just you play 3 non-conference games, including one at South Alabama, which is kind of an outlier. It's kind of humorous. They're selling a lot of billboards in South Alabama and Mobile for that game, but we play LSU the 4th game of the season at Baton Rouge. That changes everything, because after the Baton Rouge game, we get a bye week.
Any chance that's a night game?
Absolutely, because LSU, if they beat Wisconsin, you're talking about 2 teams that will probably be in the top 20. If LSU's not in the top 10.
But would it not be a 2:30 game?
It could be. I don't know. But I think it's I'm interested to see, because Dak Prescott's from Louisiana, and I guarantee he's got that puppy, circled. And at some point, you think once out of a quarter of a century, you ought to beat a team just for the heck of it. So we're due as anybody against LSU.
As a Kentucky fan, that's not always the case.
I know, man. It's just it's tough. I will never say that I'm going to beat LSU in football until it freaking happens. because I mean I was there in '99 when we beat them at home, you know, and I mean that was pure luck. I mean we're 1-24 in the last 25 years, so. Yeah, that's just the way it is. But once that game happens, you got a bye week, and then you have back-to-back Auburn and Texas A&M at home, and then another bye week, and then you get the stretch with Kentucky and Arkansas and Alabama. That kind of stretch there with UT Martin. So there's an opportunity if you beat LSU, you go into that Auburn Texas A&M stretch, which I believe we beat Texas A&M at home. But there's an opportunity to go into Alabama at 8-1. Or even close to 9-0. I mean, that's if you take care of Baton Rouge.
They don't really have, every year we talk about every SEC team has that stretch, that death row stretch of 3 or 4 games, and Mississippi State really doesn't have that. There's a hard game surrounded by a couple of easier, not really easy, but they don't have that. Like who was it? Missouri, I think their entire season happens in 3 weeks, where they play Georgia, South Carolina, and Florida back to back to back. Mississippi State does not have that. The schedule just really breaks in their favor. Yeah,
and Mississippi State's been doing that for the last 10 years, where you had we always had we had the Auburn, the LSU. For a couple of years ago, you remember we started off 7-0. We had Alabama, Texas A&M. Arkansas, Ole Miss, pretty much in 4 weeks, and maybe a 5th one in a row. So I mean, we always had that November stretch that always included, it had 4 SEC teams that were just always pretty tough to do, and it kind of broke it up with this new schedule. Getting Vanderbilt the week before replaced Arkansas, and so Arkansas got pushed up in the schedule. It broke up the Alabama and Texas A&M, back to back, and so it's pretty good. I'm looking forward to it.
And just to jump in, Shane, something tells me that's going to be a night game because there's only 3 SEC versus SEC games that week. Alabama, Florida, I feel like that's probably a 2:30 game.
Yeah.
And South Carolina, Vanderbilt, you're probably looking at an ESPN2, night game, or I don't know, even maybe an 11 o'clock game. Who knows? But I think you're looking, that changes a little bit being at night, but still.
I guess if Florida were to stumble in an early season game, they could potentially pick that Mississippi State LSU game if they were both undefeated. CBS could, at 2:30.
Yeah, if Florida lost to like a Tennessee or something.
Well, but now I'm looking. Florida has Idaho, Eastern Michigan, and Kentucky leading up to that September 20th week.
Well,
so they
if they lose one of those games, they don't.
Muschamp gets fired in week 2 if they lose one of those games.
They deserve to be to the ESPNU game.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think a loss is going to happen to Florida, but from CBS's standpoint, they think more eyeballs are going to watch a Florida-Alabama.
Absolutely.
Because there's so many Florida fans. So you've got that, and I don't know if that's an advantage for you or not to go to play LSU at night in Baton Rouge.
Yeah, it's not an advantage at all.
But if you come out with a victory, how much better does that feel if you beat LSU in a night game?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
That's just so much more ammunition to go into Auburn and A&M following that up.
Yeah, and that's the great thing is that those 2 games are at home, and so last year that was the kicker. With State, you knew that they were coming in with some inexperience. It was really going to be kind of the down cycle year, and you had the LSU and Alabama game. Your toughest games were at home, and so you had to go on the road against Arkansas. You had to go on the road against Auburn, and so. You had to go on the road against Texas A&M. Now you get those games, which are the swing games, at home, and then you take the Alabama and LSU games on the road, and you just got to figure out, hey, I don't think Alabama's out of the question. For me, I really count that as a loss just from the get-go. I think that's a solidified loss for us right now if I was picking the schedule. But I really say LSU and Alabama are really the 2 L's that I begin with, and then you really take that 3-game swing as, hey, this is what you think is going to happen. So, but I think LSU is beatable. especially in the fourth week of the season when they really haven't figured out their quarterback and some of their stuff that's going on. So we'll be interested to see.
Well, there's going to be a lot of hype on the ESPN or the SEC network.
Oh yeah.
You know, leading up to this, if there's only 3 SEC matchups that day, and Nick, I can't remember which one you said, other than the Florida Alabama, but that one wasn't a big draw. So,
Yeah, it was
Vanderbilt, South Carolina.
yeah, so, I mean, South Carolina's going to get a little play, but you know, from a meaningful game standpoint, you're going to see a lot of emphasis that week leading up. And you know, the good news for the SEC is with the deal was finally reached with DirecTV. Now you've got, would you say, 80 million eyeballs?
Yeah, 75 million plus before it even launches.
Well, it'd be 160 million eyeballs technically, though.
Yeah, that's right.
Unless you're wearing glasses, and you know that's really changing the whole.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty crazy. Yeah.
I want to get your take on this. I mean, you know, there's all this talk about, you know, Dan Mullen and how Mississippi State fans see him, because I mean, Dan Mullen has I mean, he's turned out some fairly decent seasons at Mississippi State. I mean, obviously he's never gotten them to the point where they're really up there in that 1-2 range. I mean, they went into Alabama, what was that, a couple of years ago, where they were, like you're talking about, you know, 8-0, 8-1, whatever it was. But he always seems to fall off. And not to knock him, I mean, I'm a huge Dan Mullen fan. I think the fact that he's got a quarterback that, you know, he can finally run his system with, and I think that's been one of his tripping points is, you know, he's such a system, you know, guy, and if you don't have the right guys in the right positions, I mean, it'd be like if Gus Malzahn had a pro passer back there or something.
Yeah.
But
well, I tell you, this is what it was. I mean, really going into last year, you know, I tell you right now, you're talking about a guy that if Tyson Lee basically hands the ball off to Anthony Dixon in 2009, we go bowling his first year against LSU. You know, we should have beat LSU. He decided to not hand the ball off to Anthony Dixon like a dumbass, and he was, you know, 5'8" and weighed about $140 and got stuffed. And so, you know, otherwise you're talking about you got 4 years in a row that you have gone to a bowl game, which has never happened in school history. You won 4 out of 5 Egg Bowls. Hugh Freeze's basic game plan in the Egg Bowl last year was the biggest comical joke ever. You know, basically gave the Dan Mullen kind of his bravado back in the state. And, you know, state fans have no problems with Dan Mullen. The way I've always looked at it is if we could do not what Spurrier did, not that Mullen's anything like Spurrier, but if you remember South Carolina, you went to a place that hadn't won.
Yeah.
And it takes a long time. You first got to win consistently across the board, which is why I disagreed with us playing Oklahoma State last year and understood why the school did it, because they got $2.5 million. But I also thought that, hey, you're not really that program yet. And so, you know, I think Mullen, if you see what he's done on the recruiting trail the last year, and of course right now we're sitting at 27 commitments and probably going to have a top 15 class, pretty much have the ability to sweep probably 8 of the top 10 recruits in the state of Mississippi, which is unheard of. And so Mullen has turned the corner in my eyes. You know, we're going to go to a bowl game this year. You're talking about 5 years in a row. We'll have a legitimate chance of you know, 5 out of 6 Egg Bowls. I mean, when we get into Oxford, you know, my Ole Miss friends don't want to hear about it, but if y'all remember 2 years ago in Oxford, you know, we're coming off of 4 straight losses going into, or 3 straight losses going into the Ole Miss game at Oxford, and they handed us 3 turnovers in the first half that we did not score on any of them. Basically, it was the first time that Mullen, I think, realized that the kids weren't up for it. That'll never happen again when he goes to Oxford. They'll be ready to play. And Hugh Freeze is going to be ready because he learned a lesson last year as well, so it ought to be pretty interesting. But, you know, as state fans, Mullen's doing stuff that's never happened before. You know, Jackie Sherrill kind of taught state fans how to actually win, that you could actually win there, and have a dominant program for a period of time, but it didn't last. And I think that's what Mullen's, you know, whole thing is kind of building a program and we'll see how it goes. I mean, he's, the next couple of years, we should be really, really good. We're set up to where, we're not going to have a huge dip, like we've had before. So I don't see us all of a sudden falling off and going to 3 wins.
And I think my biggest, the reason I feel that way is because you hear the national media and they're talking about, like, when is Mississippi State going to make this jump? And I don't know if there is a jump. I think the jump has been made in some cases, but there's so much pressure on guys like Bo Pelini this year and Michigan's coach Brady Hoke. Like, if they don't get to 9 wins, they're out. And I think people like to compare Mississippi State to that, maybe because they're in the SEC West. But I think if there's any fan base in the SEC, I mean, that is to the point of success that they are today, that would be, I mean, this is not a knock at all, and I think this, that would be, more happy with 9 to 10 win seasons every year consistently, and maybe never getting to that SEC championship. I think it's Mississippi State. I mean, Alabama would love some of those, in years past, in the Mike Shula days. I mean, consistency really speaks a lot to the state of the program. And going back to the Spurrier thing, I heard somebody say this, and I kind of turned my head really quick, and they said, Steve Spurrier, by the time he leaves South Carolina, could very well have solidified the South Carolina portion of his career as the best part of his career coaching.
Yeah, and he'll eventually, he's going to actually coach more games there.
Yeah, which is crazy to think about.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's what you, I think it's just the way, as a State fan, I think expectations are different today than they were when they came in. I mean, Mullen would tell you when we went 5-7, we're the happiest 5-7 team you'd ever seen in your life. Because everything was obviously turned around from, what happened there at the last year of Croom. It's just State fans haven't actually seen it, and so really the next thing, Dan Mullins won the games he's supposed to win. There wasn't a even Jackie Sherrill lost some games that he shouldn't have lost. He lost to the La Techs and he lost to the Troys. Mullen, we've had a couple of close calls, but he's won all of those, and I think that says something. To go to Troy last 2 years ago and have to basically squeak out a W. And that's just the way it is. But he's won all the games he's supposed to win. Everybody kind of jumps on they haven't beaten a team in the top 25, which is basically everybody in the West. The times that we've beaten somebody in the East, it's been Florida and they're supposedly down, or Georgia, they're supposedly down. You still got to go out and beat them, and so or Tennessee when they were down with Dooley. That's really the next step, Nick, that I think fans want to see is, hey, let's go beat Auburn, and not get close. Let's go, beat an LSU and an LSU. Let's dominate a Texas A&M at home. And that's really kind of where we are.
I like your comparison. Not necessarily that Mullen and Spurrier are on the same level as far as coaching, but the way that they've inherited the program.
Yeah.
Because, for years, South Carolina, they were just happy to make it to a bowl game.
Well, if y'all remember Spurrier's first 5, it took him 6 years, guys, before he started to get on this last 4-year stint. He's 10 years into this thing. His first 6. How many times? And the reason I remember it is because I've got a brother-in-law that's a Gamecock fan. But how many times did the dude go to the Liberty Bowl and they were 7-6? How many times did they go to Shreveport? They would get out 6-1 and lose 4 in a row and finish 8-4, 7-6. Whatever it was from a bowl game. So, Spurrier had to fight through all of that in that first part, and so I thought it was, I think that's kind of the way we had to do it. And you guys being Alabama fans, you'll kind of understand, hopefully, for where I'm coming from. For 30 years before Mullen got here, Mississippi State tried to be an LSU and be an Alabama. They tried to compete against those teams the way that they were, which is not what you can do. You basically have to go and say, this is who we are, this is how we can recruit, and this is how we can go win ball games. And when they figured out that, hey, we're going to create our own identity, we're going to create our own mark, that's where you actually saw all the marketing change, everything change. They created their own brand with the Hell State. They changed everything because they're going to do it their way and not actually do it because you can't go do it the way Alabama does it. So.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. And, I mean, you look at that, I mean, who are the teams, I mean, besides LSU that's knocked off Alabama in the past, 3 to 5 years?
Yeah.
It's the Texas A&Ms, it's Auburn, And, I mean, people like to say it's fluky play or it's this hurry-up offense stuff, but they've defined themselves and they've, said, I mean, I think it's proven. I mean, not to get on a high horse, but I think it's proven that you're not going to beat Nick Saban in his own game. I mean, it's just he knows it too well. He knows power football too well. You've got to innovate, and Dan Mullins a testament to that.
All right, so I don't know what we can do to look at the schedule since Blair's done gone over it 3 times.
How about he can't talk for the next 10 minutes?
We already know that he's got him at 11-1. Only losing to Alabama.
No, I got a 9-3. That's what my guess is.
Well, can we skip the first 3, the 3 out of conference, so we all think those are wins?
Yes. I think so, Nick.
I do.
I do too.
Okay.
I mean, just to say something real quick, I think, like Blair said, it's going to be interesting to see him play Southern Miss for the first time in 20 years. I'm pretty high on Southern Miss's quarterback. I mean, he's going to be banged up by the time they play Alabama, but he's a guy that started the past 4 or 5 games. He's a guy from Birmingham. I think he'll, he could have a pretty good season for Southern Miss this year, but, I mean, that's their only. Yeah, they're awful. So.
They're awful.
Yeah.
We're going to beat them by 30.
All right, so Death Valley at night. We've already put it in that it's going to be Death Valley at night. What do you two Bama fans think? Is there a chance for a win there? Is it their first loss?
I think there's definitely a chance, especially with the defense of Mississippi State that we've talked about. They're going to be very good defensively. LSU is going to go back to, I feel like, the 2 or 3 years ago, LSU, when they had Jordan Jefferson and Jarrett Lee, and they didn't trust themselves to throw the ball because they're going to have inexperience at quarterback. By all accounts, Leonard Fournette is like the second coming of Bo Jackson. The one real big-time plus that LSU has is a lot of offensive linemen coming back. So I kind of feel like their game plan for at least early in the season is going to be pound the rock and win with defense, kind of like the LSU that you think of before Mettenberger was so good last year. But Mississippi State is built to not allow you to do that. So I definitely think Mississippi State can win this game, but just like Blair said, until they do it, it's so hard to, especially at night, to actually pick them to do it. But you know what? I can't do it. I'm going to pick LSU in this one.
Yeah,
if it were at Mississippi State, I would pick them. But
I'm with Britton. I was looking for another loss to put on the schedule, and just when Blair said that, and I really thought about, just what it means. And granted, I think that this could be their best shot in 20+ years to beat LSU. But just like Blair said,
happen.
It's hard to put that W down here. But I'm going to tell you what, Shane, you've talked about this a lot. Not only going back to last year with Auburn, but then previewing them this year. How key that was for LSU to get Auburn so early in the schedule. And it's kind of a totally different situation, but with an unproven quarterback, a guy that was only there for 3 weeks before before school started in Nick Marshall. I think this is the time for Mississippi State. I mean, you look at it, inexperience at quarterback, you've got a guy, if you're going to be relying on a freshman, at running back, I mean, they've got some other running backs as well, but like Britton said, I mean, you've got strength at the offensive line, but, I mean, Mississippi State's got some great defensive linemen. They've also got just a stud at middle linebacker who I think, could be all SEC first team by the end of the year, depending on, some of the other players. But I don't know. I think it all comes down to it, and it's going to be like last year when we had that guy on the podcast we've mentioned before that, kind of had to prove to us that LSU had some skill. I mean, we know that they have talent. Yeah. It's obvious. I mean, they recruit out every year like Alabama does and like, these top programs. But sitting here, I mean, without any research, I couldn't name, 2 or 3 guys on that LSU defense. I mean, So I don't know if they're relying on as much inexperience that I think they are, and especially with Dak Prescott and some of the guys, dark horse guys at wide receiver that I think Mississippi State has. This could be a game for sure.
Hey, not to interrupt you guys, I know I'm not supposed to be talking here, but I got a question for you because somebody actually brought this up to me and I never even thought about it. Mississippi State's never had a game day at either one of the Mississippi schools have never had game day, and but somebody was saying if Mississippi State went in and beat LSU and they were 4-0, went on a bye week, and then they have Auburn at home the 6th week of the college football season, most likely Auburn, which I don't have their schedule in front of me, but I think they're going to be pretty much right there. Would that game be something that all of a sudden gets college game days interested? If all of a sudden you got a 4-0 Mississippi State team that ought to be probably top 15 if they beat LSU at LSU. I'm just pretty interested.
Yeah. There's definitely a chance there. Auburn would have LSU on October 4th. The week before that Mississippi State-Auburn game would go down, and they outside of the LSU game, which they I think they would win.
They play LSU the week before they play us. Okay.
Yeah. So there's a very good chance they're 5-0 if they beat LSU. They're probably 5-0 coming into that game.
And I was looking at this real quick. I was out of curiosity. They haven't announced it yet, but the SEC Network's version of game day, I think it's very possible that they're going to be there.
Yeah.
And I don't know how that plays in. If obviously there's going to be some SEC versus SEC games that game day is going to want to cover, but they don't have past the 20th, I don't think, announced, which they're going to be in Tuscaloosa for. But you're right. I mean, hey,
I totally forgot about the whole SEC Network side of the thing. I mean, I know we're in the schedule, but one of the things that I heard was a number of somewhere around 40 to 45% of the viewers of College Game Day are SEC states. So basically, you're talking about having your own SEC branded College Game Day. How does that affect the actual real College Game Day? Where you can turn it on and not watch the crap about the Big Ten, but you can
That's a good question.
You can watch everything about the SEC.
Yeah.
I thought that was a very large number, and was wondering how that would impact. Which makes sense on why Fox decided just to throw their thing out the window because, I mean, my gosh, they couldn't compete with Game Day, much less multiple ones. So.
I think it's telling, and I think it's tomorrow. I'm not quite sure. The SEC is going to have a media days just for the SEC Network, which is kind of weird. But I heard today, I think it was Feinbaum that said this, that I caught part of it. He was on the morning show in Birmingham today, that the SEC, so this may change after the first year, but I think it's called SEC Now or something, their version of Game Day is going to have a live tie-in with the actual program. So I think, and you know what, once you said that, Blair, I think this might actually be so we don't lose part of the Game Day viewership. It's not to popularize the SEC Network. It could be to keep the SEC viewers tuned in to the real Game Day. Because if you can get SEC all the time, like you said, who cares about Ohio State? Who cares about Michigan and Nebraska and all these teams?
That's interesting.
That's a good point.
All right, back to the schedule. I'm sorry.
All right, I'm going to give LSU the win too. It's just they're very difficult to beat at home and even harder to beat at night. And we all seem to be
y'all are a bunch of gumbo loving.
I do love some gumbo and crawfish. So yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I do too.
It has nothing to do with the fact I'm picking LSU. I know a Mississippi boy on this podcast has done more than one crawfish boil.
Yeah, done a few.
Hey, we need to have an annual SEC Sports Roundtable podcast, crawfish boil.
Well, you know what we need to do, Shane? I've actually got the crawfish table that I built. So all we need is some SEC Sports Roundtable stickers, and then we can basically we can just lacquer that baby on the table, man. Make you a Sports Roundtable table.
There you go. It could be the Sports Roundtable.
That's right.
We actually had a Sports Roundtable at one time.
Yeah, that's true.
So we're all going to, Blair, I think you gave them a loss too, did you not?
Yeah.
So we're all in agreement. A&M, I think, I do believe there's a chance that they can win that game. I think it's a better chance to win than
that's a W.
Yeah, I've got him at a lock,
Texas,
and I think Britton's the same way. That I'm just not on the Texas A&M bandwagon at all. I'm going to be interested to see what I'm not into betting at all, but to see what the line is on this game with a team like Texas A&M who is so reliant on their offense, and a guy without Johnny Manziel. I mean, it is a little bit later in the season. They're probably going to have a couple SEC games before that, but I don't know. I mean, this is going to be. I think the Texas A&M game right here, if there is a game, an SEC game for MSU that, it's going to be a lot easier to pick after, say, the first SEC contest, I think it's going to be this game. I mean, this could be a game, we might be looking at a 20-point victory for Mississippi State, depending on how Texas A&M develops.
Yeah, and the reason I say that is 2 years ago I was there when Johnny Manziel came to Starkville, and they absolutely destroyed us. And when we went last year, that game last year was the week after Prescott's mother passed away, and it was basically the game where in the second half Mississippi State figured out that they could actually play with people. And it was a game that I looked at that said, all of a sudden, it's what changed the rest of the season for them. And so I think when they come there, I think that's the one, I think with a bye week ahead of that, I think that's going to be one they're going to be really prepared for.
Yeah, I've got Mississippi State. I think Texas A&M winds up finishing 6th in the West this year. I just don't think they're going to be very good, and I think Mississippi State probably wins pretty easily.
What about the Auburn matchup?
Well, I picked Mississippi State in the Auburn preview, so even though I don't know how consistent I am from preview to preview, I'm going to be consistent here, and I think Mississippi State finally gets it done. I think this is a little interesting because this is usually one of the first games of the season, right? Blair, Auburn, Mississippi State. So I kind of wish that it still were this year because I think that would be such an interesting early season matchup where we kind of think Auburn's going to hit the ground running a little bit more than they have in the past just because they have so many guys coming back. And we think Mississippi State's defense is going to be really good. So that would be a really cool, first, second week matchup to see just because it's all so new but we feel like we know what we're getting a little bit with these two teams. So now it's in the middle of the season. We should still know what we're getting. I think Mississippi State takes care of business, and that's a huge win for them.
Well, I'm looking at the schedule. You got them at 10-2, don't you?
Maybe not. I got a little surprise. I got a surprise for you, Blair.
So, Blair, I couldn't do it to you and stick them with the Ole Miss loss, so I had to give the loss to Auburn. I think Britton's right. And, we actually didn't get to talk about this on the Auburn preview, but I think it was announced today that Auburn lost a key offensive lineman for the year. Losing him and Carl Lawson, that's not getting too much press, but I think that's going to be huge. And this is definitely a winnable game for Mississippi State as well. You got to look at a team that at least can slow down Auburn's offense. And, other than Alabama, like I said, questions with LSU for sure on the defensive side of the ball. Mississippi State could do that. It comes down to athletes in space and how disciplined you are. And, obviously that's kind of can be a mixed bag. It's even a mixed bag for teams like Alabama and, LSU on occasions, but I stuck them with a loss. I didn't really want to, but I just couldn't. I wanted to put them at 9-3 and couldn't give them a loss to Ole Miss. So,
like everyone else, like you two, I'm going to give them a loss there, and I'm also going to give them a loss the next week too.
They're bye next week, yeah.
Wait, Blair, did you pick? To beat Auburn?
Game, sorry.
That's the only. I can't make up my mind on Auburn. It's that's the kicker. I think State. My gut feeling says that they can be 9-3, and it's a toss up between you either win, you beat Auburn, lose the Egg Bowl, or vice versa. And you could have problems if you go to Kentucky and not prepared and kind of fall asleep. But
that's the game I was talking about.
Yeah, but that comes after a bye week, right?
Yeah, you're right. I missed the bye. I was just looking at the next game down.
So Shane, you calling your shot? Kentucky over?
Yeah, let's be real. I mean, it's like Blair with LSU. They've got to win first. I mean, my Wildcats will be better, but I don't. They're going to be like the Arkansas program. They might be better, but their record might not be any better. So.
Yeah.
But Mississippi State's going to beat Kentucky.
Yeah, I have to agree with you on that one.
Yep, me too.
Arkansas?
That's at home. That's a W.
Yep.
Agreed.
Yep, me as well. UT Martin, no need to talk about.
Do you know who's playing for UT Martin? You know who their quarterback is?
Who?
Dylan Favre, that started out at Mississippi State.
I'm assuming this is Brett Favre's.
Yeah, it's his
Not son, right?
Nah, it's his brother's. I think.
Is it his nephew or?
No, yeah, it is his nephew, but it's his brother's son. But I think he's adopted.
No, well.
So I don't think he's a bloodline. But hell, I don't know. Anyway, but he threw for like 9,000 yards at Pass Christian State. Took him, and he played his freshman year. If you remember, he actually got in a couple of games, and then a couple of pot incidences later, he's gone the JUCO/UT Martin route with a kid.
A couple of Dustin Johnsons later.
Yeah. I don't know, man. I don't know if he's rolling up those 20s.
He might have been doing both.
Yeah.
Rolling C notes and chasing them with.
There you go.
And another player's girlfriend, from what I'm understanding.
Yeah.
So.
Couple of them.
Yeah.
Not a well-liked man on tour right now, is he?
No.
Yeah, he's about as much liked as Tiger.
Apparently golfers are like crazy partiers. You got Tiger Woods, this guy. I mean, who knew?
Look at that. I bet Duffner's been known to party.
Yeah, he looks like he parties.
Well, didn't he? And correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't he like fill up the tour championship trophy or whatever? He like shotgun a couple beers out of it or something.
Oh yeah, man.
Yeah.
Michelle Wee did.
When Wisner and I went to Kiowa for the PGA Championship a couple years ago, that was the one where Rick Fowler and Bubba Watson had a house on Kiowa. Mm-hmm. And they actually posted videos of them jumping off the roof into the swimming pool. and this was the week of the PGA Championship.
Oh, man.
They're jumping off the roof into a swimming pool.
Well, there was CBS had a preview of the PGA Championship on, I guess it was yesterday. And Haley goes, "Who is that guy?" I said, "It's Jason Duffner. He's a golfer. He won the PGA last year, the PGA Championship last year." "Really?" "He looks like he parties." I said, "He probably does."
That's funny.
We'll blame that on his Auburn degree, right?
Yeah.
That's right.
So, at Alabama.
That'd be an L.
One thing this is kind of the opposite of what I said about Auburn, or LSU actually getting them early. I think if you're playing Alabama early, it could be a totally different game. But with the youth that is expected in the defensive backfield, you got to think that Saban's going to have them ready. Jacob Coker or Blake Sims, hopefully growing into their role. I mean, they don't have to do too much, to beat a Mississippi State or any SEC team, but I don't know. I haven't. Britton, you could speak to who Alabama plays before and after this, or if there's a bye or anything. But that could play into it, obviously. But one thing's for sure: if you get past Auburn, this could very well determine the SEC West. So it's a huge game, no matter what. I mean, even though it's always a huge game for Mississippi State fans, I'm sure. But it quickly becomes a game for Alabama that the Mississippi State game hasn't been. Normally it's been kind of a trip-up game, but if you got to go through Mississippi State to win the SEC West, it's a different contest.
Yeah, and one thing you guys got to remember, and if you asked about Mullen and how State fans look at him, the biggest complaint Mullen has with Mississippi State fans are, and this is one of the things that drives me crazy, is that if you've got a less talented team, there's no way you should play conservative. You should lay everything out on the line. And against against Alabama and LSU, the last 4 years, Mullins playing, especially Alabama, has been conservative, and he's never just basically just says, hey, we're just going to lay everything out and we're going to throw everything in the kitchen sink at them. And that's what I'm hoping with Dak Prescott. He's got the ability to say, hey, I'm going to throw everything at them. And, they may beat us, but we're not going to just, be predictable. And so we'll see. But I think the kicker is you win that LSU game, that Alabama game becomes a really, really, really big game down the road because you're probably looking at possibly one loss going in there.
Now, could Alabama come in be taking Mississippi State for granted? If that's the case.
Well, they have Mississippi State always has the advantage. The last several years of playing Alabama the week after Alabama plays LSU, and it always seems to be like that's just a knockdown, drag-out slugfest. And Alabama's kind of emotionally exhausted.
Yeah.
Don't know if it'll be as much that way this year, just with where LSU is defensively, but that always plays into the favor of Mississippi State. And I do think that there's a real good chance that this is, that this has West Division title implications. So I'll put it this way: I'm very glad that we played at Mississippi State last year, and that this year it's coming to Alabama.
Yeah.
Because I would be more than a little bit nervous about it if it were not going to be in Tuscaloosa. I'm still picking Alabama, but this is definitely going to be. Alabama has a pretty easy schedule from the East too, so this is going to be one of the tougher games of the year for Alabama.
They've got Tennessee and who?
You just tested me. Florida. Sorry. Wow, Florida.
Yeah, Florida.
So maybe easy. Maybe not.
Yeah, I guess if Florida turns into what Florida is supposed to be, it may not be as easy, but no one really knows what to expect there.
Yeah, supposedly Kurt Roper's going to be the savior.
And I really know that Dan Mullen and his support staff will listen to this podcast. I'm sure that they get their pointers and stuff, from us. But if I am Mississippi State, I look back at some of the game plans that Auburn has come up with, and even though Gene Chizik, we could talk about Gene Chizik all night and what kind of a coach he is. I will give him credit that Blair, he had that aspect of no matter what Auburn had done coming into the season or coming into the final game against Alabama into the Iron Bowl, it was whatever was on the table. I mean, you've seen Gene Chizik. It was almost scripted to me that Gene Chizik was going to pooch kick it the first kick of the game in the Iron Bowl.
Yeah.
And we still didn't cover it right, and it still didn't make sense. I mean, if I'm Mississippi State, I'm talking plays like that. I'm not talking about just, we're going to go out there and we're going to, be a little bit more than conservative. I'm talking about every play in the book. I mean, What do you have to lose?
Although there's the potential if they come in there.
That is true. We're kind of talking about how the normal if Mississippi State comes in with 3 or 4 losses, but if you're playing with 1 loss and for the SEC
then you have everything to lose.
Yeah, that is true. But at the same, I don't know.
But do you really have everything to lose? Because a loss at the end of the day is a loss. So why not throw it all out there?
That's true.
I mean, if you're gonna, if we're all sitting here picking Alabama to win this game, you're not expected to win. So why not throw everything out there if you're in that situation?
I guess it's just harder. I guess it's just worse to look back and to say, wow, if you make some mistakes, if you make some turnovers, you throw the ball deep or something, whatever it is, if you lay it too much out on the line and you end up losing the game because of that, I guess it feels worse. You say maybe we could have been more conservative. We might have had a chance, but I don't know.
That's the funny thing with us college football fans. We can never be happy.
I know. There's never a silver lining.
Do we give them a win against Vanderbilt at Mississippi State?
I do.
I do.
Absolutely.
All right, so that leaves the Egg Bowl.
Who wants to go first?
I'll go first. The Egg Bowl was quietly one of my favorite games of last year. It was kind of, is that Thanksgiving weekend?
It was last year.
Okay. Last year, it was just kind of fun for me to watch. It was one of those night games. There wasn't too much happening. And that's one of the games that sticks in my memory from last year, besides Alabama games and, national championships and stuff. But Bo Wallace, arguably the most experienced, probably starch-wise, the most experienced guy coming back. Hugh Freeze, with the offense that he runs, you just never know. But I think Mississippi State's defense really matches up well with Ole Miss's skill players. Treadwell may be a mismatch on the outside, but you look at it, they don't have Moncrief anymore. A couple of those guys are gone. This is a win in my book, and obviously it's like the Iron Bowl. You never can, chalk down a win either way. But you come off, the Vanderbilt game. I think that helps you as well. Having Vandy being a little bit down from what they have been in the James Franklin years, a little bit of uncertainty there, but it's going to be another exciting one for sure. The Egg Bowl is, quietly one of the more contested rivalries that we don't talk about near as much. It's going to be exciting for me, and especially if even a 1 or 2 loss Mississippi State team comes in, could be one of the more important Egg Bowls, in history.
Yeah.
Blair, I'll let you finish it off, so I'll go next, I guess. I've got Ole Miss winning this game, and don't have a ton of great reason because I do think Mississippi State is probably the better team this year, but I have Mississippi State 9-3, and I have them beating Auburn because I have Auburn 9-3, and I want Mississippi State to be second in the West, not Auburn. So that is my hardcore football analysis. I do think Ole Miss is going to be I think it's between Ole Miss and LSU who's 4th in the West this year. So I think Ole Miss is going to have a good year. Bo Wallace, as you mentioned, has the experience there. And as Blair mentioned, 4 out of the last 5 have gone Mississippi State's way. This is a fairly even matchup historically, I believe. So I feel like maybe it's time for that to swing. So I'm picking Ole Miss, but Mississippi State still winds up 9-3 and second in the West. So that's not a bad year.
Well, like you, I have them 9-3, but I had them with losses against Alabama, Auburn, and LSU. So I'm giving them another Egg Bowl.
Nice. I like you, Shaner. No, I think I'm excited about the Egg Bowl because usually the home team wins. We won 4 years ago, I guess, at Ole Miss when they were just god awful and Houston Nuts second to last year. So. This will be interesting because if you guys remember last year, in Ole Miss and Hugh Freeze could have buried us. Coming off of the 9th ranked recruiting class, we're basically putting together a top 15 recruiting class last year. We're having the better season. Rolled into Missouri, got waxed. Rolled into Starkville and got beat. Hugh Freeze's game plan was completely ridiculous. Mississippi State basically just, destroyed them on the defense, and we beat them with pretty much a guy coming off in the 4th quarter because we had a true freshman that kept it close for 3 quarters. So, I keep going back to Ole Miss is going. They're going to be ready because it's an Egg Bowl and it's at home, and they've lost 4 out of 5. But the way that Mississippi State lost that game 2 years ago sticks into Dan Mullins' craw like nothing else. He feels like those guys weren't prepared, and it was the first time where they felt like, hey, we can just still walk in here and pop them in the mouth, and they're going to lay down like they've done for 3 years, and it's going to be over with. And when they didn't convert those turnovers, came out in the second half, and Ole Miss caught fire. So the big pendulum swing was last year, and all of a sudden they could have buried Dan Mullen, and now Mullen's got a top 15 class and is beating up on Ole Miss in the in-state in recruiting, and he's got a good start to 2016, and so was Ole Miss, but it's one of those things where anything can go. So I'm taking a W because I'll never lose to those sons of good.
I think that wraps us up for another preview. Look for our next installment later in the week. Got a couple of tentative things in place, so I don't have a hard date and team in place for this one yet. So I will, it's going to be a surprise for everyone. We're covering all 14 teams. Maybe if we haven't covered yours will be next. But any parting shots before we close up shop for the night, guys?
Go Bulldogs.
4 out of 5 Egg Bowls, baby.
Nick, you got anything?
Nah, not really.
All right, guys. With that, we're going to call this podcast done.